Maria lived a quiet life in a small town where everyone knew each other. She was the kind of neighbor who always smiled, watered her plants early in the morning, and waved at children when they went to school. She never liked attention, and most people thought she was just an ordinary woman who preferred peace and simplicity. What people did not know was that Maria was a veteran. She had served her country many years ago, and though those days were behind her, they were never far from her heart. She did not often talk about her time in service. She had stories that could fill books, but they were stories she chose to keep locked inside. To her, the past was not something to boast about, but something to respect in silence. One afternoon, a notice was placed on the town board about a community gathering. It was going to be a celebration of local heroes, especially those who had once served in the military. Families were invited, and there would be music, speeches, and food. At first, Maria thought about skipping the event. She never liked crowds, and she disliked talking about herself even more. But her neighbor, Mrs. Green, came to her door and said gently, "Maria, you should come. You served your country. People should know." Maria could not say no to Mrs. Green. She was an elderly woman who always looked out for her. So on the day of the event, Maria dressed simply. She wore a plain shirt under a light jacket, comfortable shoes, and tied her hair back neatly. She walked to the town hall, trying not to think too much about what the evening might bring. The hall was decorated with flags, colorful ribbons, and bright lights. Children ran around holding little paper flags, while adults greeted each other warmly. A small band played cheerful music in the corner. Maria slipped inside quietly, hoping to sit at the back, but several people noticed her and waved. She nodded politely, but her plan of staying invisible did not last long. The event began with speeches. The mayor thanked the veterans and spoke about their sacrifices. Then the main organizer, a young man named Paul, stepped forward with a microphone. He was full of energy and enthusiasm, eager to make the evening lively. He began calling veterans to the stage one by one. Some veterans proudly walked up, told short stories, and even shared jokes. Others showed old medals or patches they had kept from their time in service. The crowd clapped and cheered after each one. Then Paul looked around the hall and spotted Maria. He smiled brightly and said, "And now, we would like to welcome someone very special. Please give a hand to Maria." Maria froze for a second. She had not expected to be called. The people around her encouraged her with smiles and gentle nudges. Slowly, she rose to her feet and walked to the stage. Every step felt heavy, but she kept her back straight. When she stood under the lights, Paul looked at her kindly. Then he said something that surprised everyone. "We want each veteran to show their pride in service. Many have a tattoo or a mark that tells their story. If you have one, would you remove your jacket and shirt so the people can see?" The hall went silent. Some thought it was a strange request. A few veterans laughed it off and rolled up their sleeves to show small tattoos of flags or unit symbols. Others simply opened their jackets to reveal badges sewn inside. Maria did not laugh. She did not move at first. She looked calm on the outside, but her heart began to beat faster. She had a tattoo, but it was not like the others. It was not a simple design or a decorative mark. It was something different, something very personal, something no one had ever dared to ask her about. Paul, sensing her hesitation, gave her an encouraging nod. The crowd waited, leaning forward, curious. Some people whispered softly, wondering if she had anything to show at all that Maria knew she could refuse. She could have simply smiled and stepped back. But deep inside, she felt it might be time. Perhaps the years of silence were long enough. Perhaps the people needed to see that her service was more than just medals or memories. With steady hands, Maria slipped off her jacket. The crowd grew even quieter. She began unbuttoning her shirt, her movements slow but firm. No one dared to speak now. The room was filled with tension and expectation. When she pulled the fabric aside and revealed her shoulder, the air seemed to freeze. Her tattoo was not ordinary. It was not just a symbol of her unit or a flag. It was something deeper, something that carried a story so powerful that even the oldest veterans in the room lowered their eyes. The hall remained silent. No one dared to speak. The room stayed completely quiet after Maria showed her tattoo. No one clapped, no one spoke, and even the sound of the small band stopped as the musicians lowered their instruments. People leaned forward in their chairs, staring at the design on her shoulder. It was not a large tattoo, but it was bold and carefully drawn. It showed a pair of wings, open and wide, with a single star resting in the center. Around the star was a small circle of words, but the words were not in plain language. They were written in a code that very few people could understand. Those who had once served in certain missions or secret operations recognized it immediately, and that was why they lowered their eyes. Maria stood calmly, her face steady. She did not smile, but she did not look embarrassed either. She stood the way she had once stood in the military, tall and respectful. She knew what her tattoo meant, and she also knew that most people in the room would not fully understand. Still, it carried weight, and the silence around her proved it. Paul, the young organizer, looked uneasy. He had not expected such a reaction. He held the microphone but did not know what to say. Finally, he asked softly, "Would you like to tell us about it?" Maria looked at the crowd. She saw curious faces waiting for her to explain, and she saw older veterans who already knew the meaning but remained silent. She took a deep breath and spoke in a calm voice. "This tattoo is not just ink. It is a memory. It is a promise. It is a reminder of people I served with and of something greater than myself." Her words were simple, but they carried strength. The crowd listened closely. Even the children in the back grew quiet. She continued, "The wings are for freedom, because freedom always needs to be guarded. The star is for guidance, because in difficult times, we all need something to follow. And the circle is for unity, because no one stands alone." Paul nodded slowly. "That is beautiful," he said. "But what about the words? What do they mean?" Maria paused. She knew this question would come. The words around the star were written in a special code. To most people, they looked like shapes or foreign letters. To those who knew, they spoke of a mission that was never written in books or mentioned in public speeches. She answered carefully, choosing her words with thought. "Those words are not for everyone. They remind me of something I cannot fully explain. But I will say this. They stand for loyalty, for trust, and for sacrifice. They remind me of people who stood with me, people who gave their best even when no one was watching." There was a deep silence after her explanation. Some people in the crowd nodded, not fully understanding but feeling the weight of her words. Others whispered softly, trying to guess the secret meaning. An older veteran in the second row raised his hand slowly. His name was Thomas, and he was respected in the town. He had served long before Maria, but he had always carried himself with quiet dignity. He stood up and said, "I know what those words mean, and I know why you carry them. You don't need to explain further. Those who understand will stay silent out of respect. Those who don't understand should only know one thing. You carry something important, something true." The hall grew even quieter. Paul lowered the microphone, realizing this moment was bigger than his event plan. Maria looked at Thomas and gave him a small nod. For the first time that evening, she felt a bit lighter. The mayor, who had been sitting in the front row, finally stood. He cleared his throat and spoke to the crowd. "We invited veterans here to honor them, and tonight we have learned that honor comes in many forms. Some stories can be told. Some stories live in silence. But what matters most is the courage, the loyalty, and the strength behind them. "Maria, thank you for sharing this with us." The crowd finally clapped, not loudly, but with steady and respectful applause. Maria buttoned her shirt again and picked up her jacket. She stepped down from the stage, her steps slow but firm. People watched her closely, some with admiration, some with curiosity, but no one with judgment thought as she sat back in her seat. Mrs. Green leaned toward her and whispered, "You gave them something they will never forget." Maria gave a small smile. She did not seek recognition, but she knew that her tattoo had spoken louder than words ever could. That night, when the event ended and people walked out into the cool evening air, the town was buzzing with quiet conversations. Everyone wanted to know more about Maria's tattoo, but nobody dared to ask her directly. The mystery had only just begun. The night after the event, Maria returned home to her small house at the edge of town. She placed her jacket carefully on the chair, boiled water for tea, and sat quietly by the window. Outside, the street was still lively with families returning from the gathering, but inside her home, it was peaceful. She thought about the silence that had filled the hall when she revealed her tattoo. She had not planned to show it, yet something inside told her it was the right moment. The next morning, Maria's quiet routine changed. Usually, she went to the local market without anyone noticing, but now people stopped her in the street. Some only smiled, others greeted her politely, but a few asked questions. "Maria, that tattoo, what does it really mean?" One shopkeeper asked while handing her some bread. Maria gave her usual calm smile. "It is a memory, that is all," she replied. At the flower stall, another woman leaned forward curiously. "My husband was a soldier, but he never saw a tattoo like yours. Was it from a special place?" Maria simply answered, "Yes, it was special." She left it at that, not giving more details. Even children noticed. A little boy who often played near her house ran up and asked, "Miss Maria, were you a hero?" His wide eyes showed honest curiosity, not the heavy curiosity of adults. Maria bent down, touched his shoulder, and said, "A hero is someone who does their duty and helps others. I tried to do that." The boy grinned and ran off happily, not needing more explanation, but not everyone was satisfied with her short answers. A group of young people who had been at the town hall gathered near the cafe, whispering about her. They wanted to know why the older veteran, Thomas, had reacted with such seriousness. They wanted to understand the meaning of the strange words around the star in her tattoo. The more Maria kept quiet, the more their curiosity grew. Later that afternoon, Paul, the organizer of the event, knocked on Maria's door. She opened it and welcomed him inside. He sat down nervously, holding a notebook. "Maria," he began, "I wanted to say thank you again for coming last night. Your presence made the event truly meaningful, but I also want to ask you something, if you don't mind." Maria poured tea for both of them before answering. "Go ahead," she said kindly. Paul hesitated. "The words around your tattoo. I could not understand them, but I felt something strong when you spoke about them. Can you tell me even a little about where they came from?" Maria looked into her cup. She did not like to speak of the past, but she also saw that Paul's curiosity was not for gossip. It came from respect. She thought carefully before replying. "Those words are from a code used by a group one once served with. It was not a group people spoke about openly, because our work was quiet and hidden. We were not on posters or in newspapers, but our duty was real." Paul leaned forward. "So it was like a secret team?" Maria gave a small smile. "You could call it that, but we did not see ourselves as secret. We saw ourselves as protectors, working in silence. The words remind me that silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes silence is strength." Paul nodded slowly, writing a few words in his notebook. "Thank you," he said softly. He closed the notebook without pressing further, showing her respect. That evening, when Paul left, Maria stood at her door for a long time, watching the sunset. She knew that by showing her tattoo, she had opened a door she had kept closed for years. Now people wanted to know more, and though she did not fear their questions, she wondered how much she should share. The following day, Thomas, the older veteran, came to visit her. He walked slowly with his cane but carried himself with dignity. Maria welcomed him warmly. They sat in her garden, where roses and daisies bloomed. Thomas looked at her tattoo, then back at her face. "You know," he said, "when I saw those words, I remembered something from long ago. Not many people understand, but I do. You were part of something that carried heavy responsibility." Maria nodded. "Yes, and it is not easy to explain to those who were not there." Thomas gave her a kind smile. "You don't have to explain. Sometimes a mark is enough. The story behind it belongs to you." Maria felt comforted by his words. Still, she knew the town's curiosity would not end. The tattoo had spoken, and once spoken, it could not be hidden again. The mystery around her was now alive. And the days ahead would bring more questions than answers. The days after the event felt different for Maria. She had lived in the town for years without attracting attention. But now every glance carried a question. At the bakery, the owner smiled politely but watched her closely, as if hoping she might suddenly reveal her secret. At the library, two students whispered to each other when she walked past, their eyes curious and full of wonder. Maria stayed calm, but she felt the change around her in the evenings. She often sat in her garden, watering her plants as she had always done. Yet now, even this quiet time brought back memories. The tattoo on her shoulder was not just ink. It was a story carved into her life. Every time she touched it, she remembered a part of her service that never left her. One night, while the moonlight filled her small living room, Maria opened an old wooden box she kept hidden under her bed. Inside were letters, a faded photograph, and a small metal tag. She picked up the photograph and stared at it for a long time. It showed a group of people in uniform, standing together, smiling despite the seriousness in their eyes. On the back of the photo were the same coded words written around her tattoo. She whispered softly, "I still remember all of you." The next morning, while she was sweeping her front porch, Mrs. Green walked over with her gentle smile. "Maria, the town is talking. Some say your tattoo has a meaning too deep to be spoken aloud. Others say it is a symbol of bravery. I think it is both. But you should know, people respect you more now. They may not understand, but they feel something in your presence." Maria thanked her neighbor and gave a small smile. She appreciated Mrs. Green's words, but respect was not what she sought. What mattered to her was keeping the memory of her companions alive. Later that week, Paul returned to visit again. He carried no notebook this time, only a thoughtful expression. "Maria," he said as they sat at her kitchen table, "after the event, people asked me what your tattoo meant. I did not tell them much, only that it was a mark of loyalty and sacrifice. But I think the town wants to hear more from you, not details, but lessons. Would you be willing to speak at the school?" Maria hesitated. "The school?" She repeated. "Yes," Paul said. "The children admire you. They are full of questions, but more than answers, they need guidance. You don't have to tell secrets. Just share what you learned in your journey." Maria thought for a moment. She had not spoken to young people about her service before. She had always believed that silence was her duty. Yet now she felt something different. Perhaps sharing a part of her experience without revealing what must stay hidden could help others. "I will think about it," she said finally. That evening, Maria walked to the edge of town, where the fields stretched wide and the wind carried a gentle sound. She remembered the day she first received the tattoo. It was not given lightly. Each person in her group had been asked to take it as a mark of trust. They had stood together in a small room, each placing their shoulder forward, one after the other, while the symbol was drawn onto their skin. It was not about beauty, it was about belonging. She remembered the words spoken by her commander that day. This mark is not for the world to see. It is for you to carry, as a promise to stand strong even when no one knows your name. Maria closed her eyes, hearing those words as if they were spoken yesterday. Some of the people in that photograph were no longer alive. Some had moved far away, living quiet lives like hers. But the bond between them remained through the tattoo. It was not just ink. It was their shared oath. As she returned home under the stars, Maria realized something. The town's curiosity was not a burden, it was an opportunity. She could not tell them everything, but she could share the values that had shaped her. The tattoo was not just her story. It was a symbol of lessons that still mattered. The next morning, she sent a short message to Paul. "Tell the school I will come." The school hall was filled with excitement the morning Maria arrived. Children whispered to each other as they sat in rows of wooden chairs. Teachers tried to keep order, but even they were curious about what Maria might say. The story of her tattoo had already traveled across the town, and now the children expected to hear something important. Maria entered quietly, wearing her simple jacket and carrying nothing but a small notebook. She walked slowly to the front, where Paul greeted her with a smile. He whispered, "Just be yourself. That will be enough." Maria nodded and faced the children. At first, the room was full of chatter, but when she raised her hand, the noise faded. Her calm presence had a way of making people pay attention without her needing to raise her voice. "Good morning," she said softly. "I was asked to come here and speak to you. I know some of you want to ask about my tattoo, but instead of answering directly, I want to tell you a story." The children leaned forward in their seats. Even the youngest ones stopped fidgeting, curious about what was coming. Maria began slowly. Once, there was a group of people who had to work together, even though they were all very different. Some were strong, some were quiet, some were quick, and some were thoughtful. At first, they did not understand each other, but over time, they learned that if they trusted one another, they could achieve things they never thought possible. A boy raised his hand eagerly. "Was that group you?" Maria gave a small smile. "It could be. But the important part is not who they were, but what they learned. They learned that strength is not only about muscles. Strength is also about keeping promises, helping others, and staying calm when things are difficult." Another child asked, "Is that why you have the tattoo?" Maria touched her shoulder gently. "This tattoo is a reminder. It tells me every day that I once belonged to a group where trust and loyalty were more important than anything else. It is not just a drawing. It is a promise written on my skin, so I never forget." The teachers exchanged glances. They could see the children listening with wide eyes, understanding that Maria's words carried more than simple advice. Maria continued, "When I look at it, I do not only see myself. I see the people who stood with me. Some of them are far away now, some are gone, but the tattoo keeps them close. It is a sign that we were connected by more than uniforms or duties. We were connected by something invisible: loyalty and care for one another." The room was silent. Even the usual noise of the hallway outside seemed distant. She then asked the children a question. "Do you have something that reminds you of a promise? Maybe a friendship bracelet, a photograph, or even a simple word you repeat to yourself?" One girl raised her hand. "I have a necklace my grandmother gave me. She told me it means I should always be kind." Maria smiled warmly. "That is your reminder, just as my tattoo is mine. We all carry signs, some we can see, and some we cannot. What matters is that we never forget the values they represent." Another boy asked shyly, "Were you afraid when you got that tattoo?" Maria paused, remembering the day it was placed on her shoulder. She nodded. Yes, I was a little afraid, not of the mark itself, but of what it meant. Because once I had it, I knew I could never take back the promise. I had to live by it every single day. And that was a serious thing to accept. But fear can be good. It can remind us that what we are doing matters. The teachers looked at one another, impressed with how Maria spoke. She did not tell stories of battles or events. She spoke in lessons, simple but deep thought at the end of her talk. Maria closed her notebook without ever opening it. She looked at the children and said, "The tattoo on my shoulder may look mysterious, but the truth is, you do not need ink to carry meaning. What matters most is how you live, how you treat others, and how you stay true to your promises. That is the real mark that people will remember." The children clapped, and the sound filled the hall. Some of them even stood up, their faces bright with inspiration. Maria gave them a small bow and stepped away from the front dot. As she left the school, Paul walked beside her. "You gave them more than explanation. You gave them a lesson they will carry for years." Maria looked at the children through the window one last time. She did not think of herself as a teacher, but she realized that sometimes the best lessons come from stories, told in silence and truth. After Maria's visit to the school, the story of her tattoo and the lessons she shared began to travel through the town quickly. People talked about it at the market, in the bakery, and even at the library. They did not know all the details of her past, but they felt inspired by her words. Her calm presence and her story of loyalty and courage became something everyone admired. One afternoon, a small local newspaper reporter came to Maria's house. She was polite and introduced herself as Lila. "Maria," she said, "I have heard about your talk at the school. People say it was very meaningful. Would you allow me to write a small article about you?" Maria hesitated. She did not like attention, and she had always believed that her past was private. But she also realized that her story could help more people than just the children in the school. She looked at Lila and nodded slowly. "You may, but please do not focus on details that should remain private. Share the message, not the secrets." Lila smiled and agreed. She spent the afternoon talking to Maria, learning about her lessons and her thoughts on loyalty, trust, and courage. Maria spoke carefully, choosing her words so that her experiences could inspire without revealing anything dangerous or secret. The next week, the article appeared in the newspaper. The headline read, "Local Veteran Teaches Lessons of Loyalty and Courage to Children." Inside, the story described her tattoo as a symbol of her past, a reminder of promises, and a lesson in living with integrity. People from nearby towns came to hear about her. Some visited Maria's small garden, asking politely if she would tell them about the importance of her tattoo. Maria welcomed them, always careful to focus on the message rather than the details of her service. Even Paul noticed the change. "Maria," he said one morning, "you have become more than a story. You are now an example for people who want to do good and stay true to their values." Maria smiled quietly. She never sought recognition, but she realized that her experience and the tattoo she carried could guide others. She felt proud, not because of herself, but because the lessons she had learned were helping people. One day, a group of young veterans came to town. They had heard about Maria from the newspaper and wanted to meet her. They were curious about her tattoo, but they also wanted to hear her advice. Maria welcomed them to her home. They sat in her garden among the flowers and the soft hum of bees, listening as she spoke about trust, teamwork, and caring for others. One young man asked, "Did your tattoo remind you of fear too?" Maria nodded. "Yes, but fear is not always bad. Fear tells you that something is important. It tells you to be careful, to think, and to act wisely. It reminds you that what you are doing matters." The young veterans nodded thoughtfully. They could see that Maria's lessons came from real experience, not from books or speeches. Soon, word of Maria's story reached the regional news. A reporter from the city wanted to interview her. Maria felt nervous, but she agreed, remembering how the schoolchildren had listened so carefully. She realized that the lessons of loyalty, courage, and promises were universal. They were worth sharing beyond her small town. The day of the interview arrived. Maria wore a simple jacket over her shirt. She stood quietly, her posture calm and confident. The interviewer asked her to explain her tattoo, and Maria spoke carefully. She described it as a symbol of trust and unity, a reminder to stay true to promises and to support those who cannot stand alone. She did not give secrets, but her words were powerful enough to touch everyone who listened. By the evening, Maria returned home, feeling exhausted but content. She looked at the tattoo on her shoulder, tracing the lines gently with her fingers. She had never imagined that her quiet life would bring such attention. But she knew the attention was not about her. It was about the values she carried, the lessons she had learned, and the promise she had made long ago. As she closed her eyes that night, Maria understood something important. Her tattoo, once a private memory, had become a quiet guide for many people. And though she preferred silence, sometimes sharing a story was the bravest thing she could do. As Maria's story spread beyond the town, she began receiving invitations she had never expected. Schools, local organizations, and even community centers from neighboring towns wanted her to speak. At first, she felt nervous. She had always preferred quiet, and now people seemed to see her as a symbol, almost like a public figure. One morning, Maria received a letter from a large community hall in a nearby city. They asked her to share her story and the meaning of her tattoo with a larger audience. She hesitated, thinking of the attention it might bring. But she also remembered the lessons she had shared with the children at the school and the young veterans who had visited her garden. Perhaps this was another chance to inspire people with the values she had always carried. After a few days of careful thought, Maria agreed. She packed lightly, carrying only a notebook and her jacket, and left for the city. When she arrived, the hall was much larger than any place she had ever spoken. Hundreds of chairs were set in rows, and a small stage was prepared with a microphone and a spotlight. As she walked on stage, Maria felt a wave of nerves. She looked out at the crowd, people of all ages, sitting patiently and waiting to hear her story. She took a deep breath and smiled gently. "Good morning," she began. "I am not here to tell secrets. I am here to share lessons I have learned in my life and through my experiences. I hope that they can help you in your journey as well." The crowd listened quietly. Maria spoke about loyalty, courage, and trust. She explained how her tattoo was a symbol, not just of her past, but of the promises she carried with her. She told them about her companions, the people who had stood with her, and the values that had guided them. When she spoke about the words around the star in her tattoo, Maria explained, "These words remind me that even when others cannot see what you do, what matters most is staying true to your promises and helping those who need you." After her speech, the audience clapped for a long time. People approached her afterward, thanking her for sharing her message. Some were curious about the tattoo itself, but Maria answered carefully, focusing on the lessons rather than the details of her service. She realized that many people were inspired not by the symbol alone, but by the way she spoke with honesty and calm confidence. That evening, as she returned to her small hotel room, Maria reflected on the day. She had always been private, but the attention she was receiving was not for personal praise. It was for the values she represented. She felt a quiet pride, knowing that her story could guide others even without revealing the parts of her past that needed to stay private. The next morning, Maria received a message from Thomas, the older veteran who had first understood her tattoo. I see the world noticing what we once carried in silence, he wrote. Remember, the lesson is greater than the attention. Keep speaking and stay true to yourself. Maria smiled at his words. They reminded her why she had chosen to share her story. It was never about fame. It was about teaching people to value trust, loyalty, and courage. The city visit continued for a week. Maria spoke at different schools, community halls, and local gatherings. Everywhere she went, people listened with respect and curiosity. Young people asked questions, adults nodded in understanding, and teachers and organizers praised her calm wisdom. By the end of the week, Maria returned to her town, tired but content. The small streets, the familiar gardens, and the quiet houses welcomed her back. For her, there was comfort in returning home after sharing her lessons so widely. She realized that while attention could be overwhelming, it could also be meaningful if it inspired people to live better lives. That night, Maria looked at her tattoo in the mirror. The wings and the stars seemed to shine in the soft light. She touched the circle of words gently and whispered, I carried this for myself. But now it is carrying others too. For the first time in years, Maria felt that her private symbol had grown into something larger. Not through fame or recognition, but through the lessons it represented and the way people listened and learned. And though the journey was far from over, she knew that her story would continue to inspire quietly, one person at a time. After returning from the city, Maria felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in years. The attention had been overwhelming at first, but now she understood its purpose. Her tattoo, once a private symbol, had quietly become a bridge between her past and the lives of others. It was no longer just a mark on her shoulder. It was a lesson carried forward through her words and actions. The town had changed subtly too. People treated her with a mixture of respect and curiosity, but always politely. They no longer whispered or stared. Instead, they greeted her with warm smiles and friendly conversation. Children came by her house to show her their small tokens of loyalty or courage, drawings of stars, paper wings, or simple notes about promises they had kept. Maria accepted each offering with a smile, feeling quietly proud of the lessons she had passed along. One sunny afternoon, Paul came to visit again. He carried a small box and a notebook. Maria, he said, the school children wanted to do something for you. They made a collection of their letters and drawings inspired by your story. Maria opened the box carefully. Inside were colorful letters, drawings of wings and stars, and simple notes that read things like, I will be brave like you. I will keep my promises, and your story reminds me to help others. Her eyes softened as she read each one. She realized that her quiet symbol had grown into something much larger than she could have imagined. These small creations, made by young hearts, carried the same lessons her tattoo represented: loyalty, courage, and unity. That evening, Maria went for a walk to the edge of town, where the fields stretched wide under the fading sunlight. She touched her tattoo lightly and remembered the words of her commander from many years ago. This mark is not for the world to see. It is for you to carry, as a promise to stand strong even when no one knows your name. Now, she understood fully. The tattoo had always been a private reminder, but by living her life with integrity and sharing her lessons, she had allowed the meaning to grow without losing its quiet dignity. People could feel the lesson without needing to know the full story, and that was exactly as it should be. A few days later, Maria was invited back to the town hall for a special event. The mayor had organized a small ceremony to honor her contributions to the community, not for fame, but as recognition of her inspiration. Maria arrived quietly, wearing her simple jacket. She did not seek attention, yet everyone turned to greet her warmly. When she stepped to the stage, the room was filled with children, adults, and veterans alike. The mayor spoke first. Maria has shown us all that courage and loyalty are not just words. they are actions. Her tattoo carries a story, but it is the lessons behind it that touch our hearts. Maria smiled gently and addressed the audience. I never wore this tattoo to impress anyone. I carried it as a reminder for myself. But if it has taught anything to others, then I am grateful. Each of us has something we carry, whether it is a mark, a memory, or a promise. What matters is how we live by it. The audience listened quietly. Some children held hands with each other, inspired by her words. The veterans in the room nodded in understanding, remembering their own quiet promises. After the ceremony, Maria walked outside to the garden, where Mrs. Green waited with tea. You have given so much, Maria, she said softly. The town, and even people beyond it, will remember your lessons for a long time. Maria sipped her tea and looked at the stars beginning to appear in the sky. I did not give them the tattoo, she said with a smile, only the meaning behind it. That is what stays with people, longer than ink ever could. She touched her shoulder once more. The wings in the star felt lighter now, not because the promise had faded, but because it had grown. It had grown into the hearts of children, young veterans, and everyone who had listened and learned. Maria knew that her story would continue quietly, in letters, drawings, and conversations, in the choices people made, and in the small acts of courage they carried forward. Her tattoo was no longer only hers, it had become a symbol of hope, loyalty, and courage for anyone who needed it. And for the first time in many years, Maria felt completely at peace. She had shared her story, honored her past, and left a legacy that no words could fully capture, but everyone could feel. The quiet woman from the small town, with her simple tattoo, had become an example of how courage, loyalty, and the lessons we carry within us can inspire a world beyond ourselves.